Divorced mother bought a rotting cabin for $1. What her son found inside was worth $1 million. The silver dollar trembled in Sarah Mitchell's weathered palm as she stood before the jeering crowd. The Arizona sun blazed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the dusty town square where the land auction had drawn every soul in Dustwell territory. Auctioneer Bart Hendricks wiped sweat from his brow and laughed. The sound cut through Sarah like a rusted blade. Behind her, 12-year-old Tommy pressed close, his small fists clenched at his sides. Mayor Edmund Cross and his wife Cordelia sat in their fancy chairs, imported all the way from San Francisco. They whispered and pointed. The crowd followed their lead like sheep following a bell. Sarah had been the talk of Dustwell ever since her husband ran off 6 months ago. The mining accident had left him unable to work. Rather than face his shame, he'd vanished in the night, left her with nothing but debts and a boy to raise. The cabin sat on the auction block like a rotting tooth. Everyone knew the stories. 3 previous owners had died or disappeared. The locals called it the widow's curse, built by some hermit named Ezekiel Thornfield who'd vanished 15 years back. Hendricks raised his gavel. The bidding had stalled at 50 cents. Nobody wanted that death trap on the edge of nowhere. Sarah stepped forward. Her worn boots clicked against the wooden platform. The crowd fell silent. She slammed the silver dollar down. Her last dollar. The deed papers fluttered in the desert wind. The crowd erupted in laughter. Mayor Cross slapped his knee. His son Wade pointed at Tommy and made faces. Cordelia Cross stood up. Her voice carried across the square like a church bell. She declared that a rotting cabin wasn't worth a bucket of spit, let alone a woman's pride. Sarah's cheeks burned red, but she kept her chin high. Tommy moved beside her. His young voice cracked as he told his mother they'd make it work somehow. Old Jeremiah Oakley sat alone on his store porch. His weathered face showed something different. Not mockery, something closer to recognition. Hendricks brought down his gavel. The cabin belonged to Sarah Mitchell for $1. The crowd dispersed, still laughing and shaking their heads. As Sarah walked away with the deed clutched in her hand, she heard the whispers. They said she'd rot away in that cursed place. Said the desert would claim her, just like it claimed the others. But Tommy squeezed her hand. His eyes held something the adults had lost. Hope. Sarah had 30 days to pay the back taxes. 30 days before they'd lose everything. The cabin waited on the horizon like a broken promise. Neither mother nor son knew that their new home held secrets. Windows gaped like missing teeth. Tommy jumped down first. His boots hit the hard-packed earth with a thud. Sarah followed more slowly. Her body ached from the long ride. The front door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Tommy pushed it open. The screech echoed across the empty landscape. Inside, dust particles danced in shafts of sunlight. The floorboards sagged in places. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its chimney cracked and blackened. Sarah ran her finger along a windowsill. Years of grime came away on her skin. She'd been the school teacher in their old town for 8 years before marriage, before everything fell apart. Her mind automatically cataloged what needed fixing. Tommy explored with the curiosity of youth. He poked at loose floorboards and examined the walls. His father had been a mining equipment mechanic before the accident. Tommy had spent countless hours watching him work, learning how things fit together. The cabin had 3 rooms, the main living area, a small bedroom, and a kitchen with a hand pump that produced only dust when Tommy tested it. But there was something else. A cellar door in the kitchen floor. Heavy oak planks bound with iron straps. A massive padlock hung from the latch. Someone had scratched deep gouges around the lock. Recent scratches. Sarah knelt beside the door. Her teaching experience included basic geology. She'd studied rock formations and water tables. The scratches looked desperate, frantic. Tommy found his father's toolbox in their wagon. The mining accident had left them with little, but somehow the tools had made the journey. He selected a thin metal file and examined the lock closely. The mechanism was old, but well made. Someone had tried to force it recently. The metal around the keyhole showed fresh damage. Sarah stood and surveyed their new home. The roof leaked in 3 places. The windows needed replacing. Winter would arrive in 2 months. They had no money for repairs. Her stomach cramped with hunger. They'd eaten the last of their bread that morning. Sarah walked outside and studied the desert landscape. Her botanical knowledge from teaching helped her identify several edible plants. Prickly pear cactus fruits, desert sage, a type of wild onion that grew near rocks. Tommy joined her outside. Together they gathered what they could find. It wasn't much, but it would keep them alive another day. That evening they sat by a small fire. The desert night brought unexpected cold. Strange sounds drifted from somewhere beneath the floor. Scratching noises, like claws on wood. Tommy pressed his ear to the kitchen floorboards. The sounds seemed... Restaurant had no positions. The seamstress claimed business was slow. At each rejection, Sarah felt the town's judgment. The whispers followed her down the dusty main street. Divorced women were suspect. Failures. Bad luck. Only Jeremiah Oakley showed her kindness. The elderly store owner offered her a cup of water and a sympathetic ear. He'd known Ezekiel Thornfield, the cabin's original owner. A good man who'd kept to himself. Jeremiah's eyes held secrets when he spoke of Ezekiel. He mentioned that the hermit had been more educated than folks realized, had books, maps, scientific equipment. Sarah returned to the cabin with empty hands, but new information. Tommy had spent the day exploring every inch of their new home. He'd found something interesting. In the bedroom wall, behind a loose board, he'd discovered a small cavity. Inside lay a leather-bound journal wrapped in oilcloth. The pages were covered in symbols and letters that made no immediate sense. Sarah opened the journal carefully. Her teaching background included basic cipher work from history lessons. This looked like a substitution code, simple but effective. Tommy studied the symbols with fascination. His mechanical mind loved puzzles. He'd spent hours as a child figuring out how his father's broken equipment worked. This was just another puzzle to solve. The first page they decoded revealed a date from 15 years ago. Ezekiel's handwriting was precise, educated. He wrote about making an important discovery, something that would change everything. But he also wrote about danger. Men who wanted what he'd found, men who would kill for it. As night fell, the sounds from beneath the floor grew louder, more insistent. Tommy was convinced someone or something was trapped down there. Sarah lit a candle and held it near the cellar door. The heavy oak seemed solid enough, but the iron straps showed stress marks. Someone had put enormous effort into trying to break in. Mayor Cross had visited that afternoon while Sarah was in town. Tommy had hidden and listened. The mayor offered to buy the cabin for $5. He'd seemed nervous, eager. His hands had shaken when Tommy accidentally knocked over a pot. The mayor had examined the cellar door closely. He'd run his fingers along the scratches, muttered something about being so close. Sarah tucked the journal into her dress. Whatever Ezekiel had hidden, it was valuable enough to attract dangerous attention. The sounds below continued through the night like a heartbeat in the earth. They were no longer alone in the cabin. Something waited beneath their feet. Tommy spread the journal pages across the rickety kitchen table. 3 days of working with the cipher had revealed its pattern. Each symbol represented a letter shifted by 3 positions in the alphabet. Her teaching background in geography helped her recognize the technical terms that emerged, words like aquifer and geological survey, terms that suggested Ezekiel had been far more than a simple hermit. The journal revealed a brilliant mind at work. Ezekiel Thornfield had been a trained cartographer and geologist before arriving in Dustwell territory. He'd come seeking gold like everyone else, but found something infinitely more valuable in the harsh desert landscape. Tommy traced his finger along a decoded paragraph. Ezekiel wrote about underground rivers and natural springs. He'd spent months mapping the territory's hidden water sources. His surveys showed a massive aquifer system running beneath the entire valley. Sarah's pulse quickened. In desert territory, water meant survival. Water meant power. The rights to control major water sources could be worth a fortune. More pages revealed Ezekiel's growing paranoia. He wrote about men watching him, following his movements. They'd figured out he'd made an important discovery. They wanted it for themselves. The final entries grew desperate. Ezekiel had hidden his complete surveys and official territorial water rights documentation somewhere safe. Somewhere the claim jumpers could never find them. He mentioned sealing everything beneath the house where only an honest person would think to look. Tommy set down his pencil. His hands were cramped from hours of careful transcription. The sounds from below had continued every night. Now they knew why. Something valuable lay trapped in that locked cellar. Outside, footsteps crunched on the desert gravel. Sarah peered through the cracked window. Wade Cross approached the cabin. The mayor's son moved with the swagger of inherited authority. Sarah quickly gathered the journal pages. She tucked them into a flour sack and shoved it behind loose boards in the bedroom wall. Tommy grabbed a battered schoolbook and pretended to study. Wade pounded on the doorframe. His voice carried the same mocking tone as his father's. He claimed he was just checking on their welfare, making sure they were settling in properly. His eyes swept the cabin interior with obvious interest. He lingered near the cellar door, asked casual questions about whether they'd explored the whole property yet. Tommy kept his expression neutral. Years of dodging bullies had taught him to hide his thoughts. He mentioned finding some old bottles and rusty cans. Nothing interesting. Wade seemed disappointed. He kicked at the cellar door with his boot. The heavy oak didn't budge. He examined the scratches around the lock with more interest than he tried to hide. After Wade left, Sarah retrieved the journal. The final pages contained crude maps of the cabin's layout. Ezekiel had drawn detailed diagrams showing the cellar's construction. Multiple chambers connected by narrow passages, a complex underground network. But more importantly, he'd marked specific locations, places where he'd hidden his most precious documents. The official territorial water rights that would prove legal ownership of the underground river system. Tommy studied his father's old mining tools. The accident had damaged his father's body but left his equipment intact. Heavy hammers for breaking rock, precise chisels for detailed work, metal files thin enough to work inside delicate mechanisms. The padlock was old but solid. Tommy had examined it carefully over the past 3 days. The mechanism showed signs of tampering. Someone had tried to pick it recently. The fresh scratches suggested multiple attempts by someone with limited skill. Tommy selected a thin file and examined the lock's internal structure. His father had taught him basic locksmithing for mining equipment repairs. This lock used a simple pin tumbler system, old-fashioned but effective. Sarah kept watch by the window while Tommy worked. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Dust devils danced across the desert like ghostly dancers. The first pin clicked into place. Tommy held his breath. The second pin required more delicate pressure. His hands had grown steady from years of helping his father repair intricate machinery. The third pin resisted. Tommy adjusted his angle, applied gentle sideways pressure while lifting. The mechanism gave way with a soft snick. The padlock opened. Tommy lifted the heavy cellar door. Ancient hinges groaned in protest. A rush of cool air flowed upward, carrying the scent of earth and hidden spaces. Wooden steps descended into darkness. Sarah lit a candle. The flame flickered in the underground draft. They descended carefully. The steps were solid despite their age. Ezekiel had built this hiding place to last. The cellar opened into a larger chamber than expected. Wooden shelves lined the walls. Metal strongboxes sat in neat rows. Everything covered in 15 years of dust, but remarkably preserved in the dry desert air. Tommy opened the first strongbox. Inside lay rolled maps and surveyor's charts. Each document was carefully labeled in Ezekiel's precise handwriting. Geological surveys of the entire valley. Water table measurements. Flow rate calculations. Sarah unrolled a large map. Her teaching background helped her interpret the symbols and measurements. The underground river system was vast. It extended for miles in every direction. The natural spring that fed it originated directly beneath their cabin. But the most important discovery lay in the final strongbox. Official territorial documents stamped with government seals. Water rights certificates that granted legal ownership of the entire aquifer system to whoever possessed them. The papers were made out to Ezekiel Thornfield, but territorial law was clear. Water rights transferred with property ownership. Sarah's $1 purchase had made her the legal owner of the most valuable water source in the territory. Tommy found something else in the shadows. Violence. He'd simply died down here, protecting his discovery until someone worthy could find it. Above them, footsteps creaked across the cabin floor. Someone had entered while they were below. Sarah blew out the candle. She and Tommy crouched in the darkness as footsteps moved above them. Heavy boots crossed the kitchen floor, paused near the open cellar door. Mayor Cross's voice drifted down from above. He called their names, claimed he'd come to check on their progress. His tone carried false concern that fooled nobody. Tommy pressed against his mother. They waited in the blackness. The footsteps moved away from the cellar entrance. Cross was searching the other rooms. Sarah's mind raced through the implications of their discovery. The water rights documents made her the legal owner of the territory's most valuable resource. In the desert, water was more precious than gold. These papers could make her rich beyond imagination. But they also made her dangerous. Someone had been trying to break into this cellar for years. The fresh scratches on the lock proved it. Cross's nervous behavior suddenly made perfect sense. The footsteps returned to the kitchen. Cross called down into the cellar, asked if anyone was down there. His voice echoed off the stone walls. Tommy found Sarah's hand in the darkness. They remained perfectly still. After several minutes, the footsteps moved toward the front door. Cross muttered something about coming back later. Only after the sound of hoofbeats faded did Sarah light another candle. They needed to understand exactly what they'd found before anyone else discovered their secret. Sarah spread the water rights documents across a wooden crate. Her teaching experience included basic territorial law from civics lessons. These papers were legitimate government certificates, signed by territorial officials and stamped with official seals. The documents granted complete water rights to the underground aquifer system, not just the spring beneath their cabin, but the entire network that fed it. Miles of underground rivers that could irrigate thousands of acres of farmland. Tommy studied the geological surveys while Sarah examined the legal papers. His mechanical mind grasped the engineering implications immediately. The natural spring system could support a major settlement, multiple towns, an entire agricultural region. The surveys showed precise water flow measurements, seasonal variations, pressure readings that indicated the aquifer's massive size. Ezekiel had spent years creating the most complete water survey in territorial history. Sarah remembered a dispute between two ranchers in her old town. Both claimed water rights to the same creek. She'd helped the territorial judge research the legal precedent. His surveys with the territorial government 15 years ago. His death hadn't invalidated the rights. They transferred automatically with property ownership. Tommy discovered something else among Ezekiel's belongings, a detailed journal describing his final months. The hermit had grown increasingly paranoid as men began watching his movements. He'd recognized the signs of claim jumpers planning to steal his discovery. The journal named names. Mayor Cross and Bart Hendricks had been among the men pressuring Ezekiel to reveal his findings. They'd offered to buy his property for a fraction of its value. When he refused, they'd begun making threats. Ezekiel had sealed himself in the cellar with his most valuable documents. His plan was to wait out the danger. But his heart had failed him down here in the darkness. He'd died protecting secrets that could transform the entire territory. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. These documents represented more than personal wealth. They controlled the future of every farm and business in the valley. The power to decide who got water and who went thirsty. Tommy found Ezekiel's final letter tucked inside the water rights folder. The hermit had written instructions for whoever eventually found his hidden treasure. He asked that the water be used fairly, that it benefit everyone in the territory, not just the wealthy few. The letter explained why Cross had been so eager to buy the cabin. The mayor had figured out that Ezekiel's surveys were hidden somewhere on the property. He'd been systematically buying up surrounding land, waiting for the chance to search the cabin thoroughly. But he'd needed to wait until the property became available again. The 3 previous owners had all been driven away or died under suspicious circumstances. Cross had been playing a long game, waiting for his chance to claim Ezekiel's discovery. Sarah realized that their public humiliation at the auction had been carefully orchestrated. Cross wanted her to feel desperate, grateful for any offer to buy the worthless property. He'd expected her to sell quickly and cheaply, rather than face the cabin's supposed curse. Tommy discovered additional documents that confirmed their worst fears. Cross had been buying desert land throughout the valley, using false names and shell companies. He'd assembled a massive holding of apparently worthless property. All of it would become incredibly valuable once he controlled the water rights. The mayor's mining consortium was just a cover story. His real plan was to create an agricultural empire built on water monopoly. He'd control every farm, every business, every family that needed water to survive. But Sarah's $1 purchase had disrupted everything. The water rights now belonged to a woman Cross couldn't intimidate or buy off easily. A former school teacher who understood both the legal and moral implications of what she'd found. Above them, the cabin creaked in, the desert wind. Night was falling. They needed to get these documents to safety before Cross returned with more men and better tools. Tommy began carefully rolling up the surveys and certificates. Sarah gathered Ezekiel's personal papers. They'd found treasure beyond their wildest dreams, but it came with dangers they were only beginning to understand. The real fight was just beginning. Tommy pressed his ear to the cabin wall as voices approached outside. Mayor Cross's heavy footsteps were unmistakable. So was Bart Hendricks's nervous shuffle. They'd returned sooner than expected. Sarah gathered the water rights documents with practiced efficiency. 3 days of planning had prepared them for this moment. The real papers disappeared into a specially constructed hiding place Tommy had built using his father's carpentry knowledge. In their place, Tommy arranged carefully crafted forgeries across the cellar table. His mechanical training had taught him precision in measurement and drafting. The fake documents looked authentic enough to fool desperate men in dim light. Cross pounded on the front door. His voice carried false authority as he announced an official inspection of the property. Sarah and Tommy exchanged glances. They'd expected this confrontation. Sarah opened the door with calculated reluctance. Cross pushed past her without invitation. Hendricks followed, his auctioneer's confidence replaced by obvious nervousness. Cross's eyes swept the cabin interior with predatory intensity. He claimed to be investigating reports of structural damage, potential safety hazards that might require immediate evacuation. Tommy played his role perfectly. He asked innocent questions about the inspection process, mentioned finding some old papers in the cellar that might interest the mayor. His voice carried just enough excitement to seem genuine. Cross's demeanor shifted instantly. The false authority vanished, replaced by barely contained greed. He suggested they examine these papers immediately. For historical purposes, naturally. In the cellar, Cross's hands shook as he unrolled the forged documents. The dim lantern light obscured the deliberate errors Tommy had included. Wrong territorial seal designs, impossible water flow measurements, legal terminology that made no sense under actual law. But Cross saw only what he wanted to see. Official-looking papers that seemed to confirm Ezekiel's water rights discovery. His breathing grew labored as he calculated the implications. Hendricks examined the geological surveys with growing excitement. Neither man possessed the expertise to recognize the subtle flaws Tommy had embedded in every document. Their greed blinded them to obvious inconsistencies. Cross made his offer immediately. $500 for the entire property. Cash payment within 24 hours. He emphasized the generous nature of his proposal. Most folks would consider it a fortune. Sarah played her part with. She expressed surprise at the sudden interest in her worthless cabin, asked probing questions about why these particular papers made the property so valuable. Cross's explanations revealed more than he intended. He mentioned the mining consortium's need for reliable water sources, spoke of development plans that would transform the entire valley. His words painted a picture of massive profits built on water monopoly. Tommy listened carefully while pretending to organize the fake papers. Cross's casual comments confirmed their worst suspicions about his long-term plans. The mayor intended to control every drop of water in the territory. But something else became clear during the conversation. Cross and Hendricks had been the original claim jumpers who'd terrorized Ezekiel. They'd spent 15 years systematically acquiring desert land while searching for the hermit's hidden surveys. Cross mentioned specific details about Ezekiel's final months. Information only someone who'd been watching the hermit closely would possess. He knew about the geological equipment, the surveying expeditions, the precise timing of Ezekiel's disappearance. The mayor's mining consortium was entirely fictional, a cover story to explain his interest in apparently worthless desert property. His real business was land speculation based on stolen geological intelligence. Hendricks grew more nervous as Cross talked. The auctioneer clearly understood the criminal implications of their activities. Land fraud was a federal crime in territorial jurisdictions. The penalties included lengthy prison sentences. Sarah pressed for more information while maintaining her facade of confused innocence. She asked about the previous owners who died or disappeared, wondered if there might be some curse affecting the property. Cross's reaction was telling. He dismissed the curse stories as superstition, while simultaneously revealing detailed knowledge of each previous owner's fate. His explanations were too smooth, too well rehearsed. The first owner had died in a suspicious fall down his own well. The second had vanished during a supposed hunting trip. The third had sold quickly after experiencing a series of unfortunate accidents. Tommy recognized the pattern immediately. Cross had been systematically eliminating anyone who might discover Ezekiel's hidden documents. The cabin's reputation for death and disappearance was entirely manufactured. But Cross had made a crucial error. His eagerness to secure the fake documents had led him to reveal the full scope of his criminal enterprise. Sarah's teaching experience in territorial law helped her recognize multiple federal violations. As the conversation continued, Cross grew more aggressive. He demanded immediate acceptance of his offer, suggested that refusing such generosity might lead to unfortunate consequences for a woman living alone with a young son. The threat crystallized Sarah's resolve. These men had terrorized Ezekiel, murdered innocent property owners, built their wealth on fraud and intimidation. The water rights documents represented more than financial security. They were weapons against injustice. Tommy began gathering the fake papers as if preparing to hand them over. His movements were calculated to maintain the deception while buying time for their real plan to unfold. Neither Cross nor Hendricks noticed the subtle signals passing between mother and son. They were too focused on their anticipated victory to recognize the trap closing around them. The territorial marshal would arrive within hours. Jeremiah Oakley was already spreading word of Cross's crimes throughout the territory. The mayor's empire of corruption was about to crumble. But first, they had to survive the night. Sarah and Tommy crouched behind the mesa rocks as three riders approached their cabin through the moonlit desert. Cross's bulk was unmistakable even in shadow. Hendricks rode beside him, clutching a heavy tool bag. The third man remained mounted as lookout. The fake documents lay scattered across the cellar table, exactly as Tommy had arranged them. His forgeries were masterful enough to fool greedy men in poor light, but contained deliberate flaws that would reveal themselves under scrutiny. Cross and Hendricks entered the cabin without ceremony. Lantern light flickered through the broken windows as they descended into the cellar. Their excited voices carried across the desert night. Sarah smiled grimly. Her afternoon in town had been productive. She'd visited Jeremiah Oakley first, sharing carefully selected details of their discovery. The elderly store owner had listened with growing amazement. Jeremiah had revealed his own secret then. He'd been Ezekiel's closest friend and confidant. For 15 years he'd waited for someone honest to find the hermit's hidden surveys. More importantly, he'd been documenting Cross's illegal activities during that entire time. The store owner had shown Sarah his private records, detailed accounts of land fraud, intimidation, and suspicious deaths connected to Cross's operations. Evidence carefully preserved in anticipation of this moment. Jeremiah had sent word to the territorial marshal 3 days earlier, when Wade Cross had carelessly mentioned strange activities at the cabin. Federal investigators were already en route from Tucson, with authority to examine Cross's mining consortium. But Sarah hadn't waited for official help. She'd spent hours that afternoon visiting every family, business, and farm in Dustwell territory. The water rights discovery would affect everyone's future. They deserved to know the truth. Her teaching background had prepared her for public speaking. She'd presented the facts clearly and simply. Ezekiel's surveys proved a massive water source lay beneath the valley. The legal documents established rightful ownership. Cross's consortium was built on fraud and murder. The response had been immediate and overwhelming. Farmers who struggled with failing wells, ranchers who'd watched their cattle die from thirst, business owners who'd seen promising ventures fail from lack of water. All of them understood the implications instantly. By sunset, half the territory had gathered in town. They'd listened as Sarah explained Cross's 15-year campaign of deception, his systematic elimination of cabin owners, his fraudulent land acquisitions based on stolen geological intelligence. The crowd's mood had shifted from curiosity to anger to determination. These were hardy frontier people, accustomed to taking action when authorities were absent. They'd organized quickly and efficiently. Now they waited in the darkness surrounding the cabin, 50 armed men and women forming a silent perimeter. Cross and Hendricks had walked into a trap of their own making. Inside the cellar, Cross's voice rose in frustration. The fake documents were revealing their flaws under close examination. Wrong dates that predated territorial organization, geological measurements that violated basic physics, legal language that referenced non-existent statutes. Hendricks sounded panicked. He'd recognized the forgeries and understood their implications. If the real documents existed elsewhere, their entire plan was compromised. Cross began shouting demands. He wanted to know where Sarah and Tommy were hiding, where the authentic papers might be concealed. His civilized facade was crumbling under pressure. Sarah checked her pocket watch. The territorial marshal should arrive by dawn. Until then, they needed to keep Cross and his men contained. The community volunteers were positioned to prevent any escape. Tommy had insisted on joining the surveillance, despite his mother's concerns. His mechanical knowledge of the cabin's construction made him valuable for predicting Cross's movements. He'd identified every potential exit route and helped position watchers accordingly. Wade Cross had surprised everyone by volunteering to help. The mayor's son had been horrified to learn about his father's crimes. His guilt over years of bullying Tommy had motivated him to seek redemption through action. The boy had provided crucial intelligence about his father's plans and methods. He'd also helped recruit other young people who'd grown tired of living under Cross's authoritarian rule. Cross and Hendricks emerged from the cabin, empty-handed and furious. They'd torn apart every hiding place Tommy had identified during their planning sessions. The absence of authentic documents confirmed their worst fears. The mayor began issuing orders to his mounted companion, something about searching the general store and questioning Jeremiah Oakley. His voice carried the desperation of a cornered animal. Sarah raised her lantern signal. 50 shadows rose from concealment around the cabin perimeter. The mounted lookout's horse spooked at the sudden movement. Desert silence gave way to the sound of approaching footsteps from every direction. Cross spun in confusion as figures emerged from behind rocks, bushes, and desert terrain. His hand moved toward the gun on his hip before recognizing the futility of resistance. Too many weapons were already trained on him. Jeremiah Oakley stepped into the lantern light. His aged voice carried clearly across the desert night. He announced that the territorial marshal was expected within hours. Cross and his associates were under citizen's arrest pending federal investigation. Cross's bluster collapsed entirely when he saw the size of the crowd. Every person he'd cheated, intimidated, or stolen from had come to witness his downfall. The empire of corruption he'd built over 15 years was crumbling in a single night. The real documents remained safely hidden with Jeremiah, but their power had already transformed everything. Water would flow freely to those who needed it most. Justice was finally coming to Dustwell territory. The territorial marshal arrived at dawn with 2 federal deputies and a warrant for Cross's arrest. Marshal James Crawford was a weathered man who'd spent 20 years investigating frontier corruption. He examined Sarah's water rights documents with professional thoroughness. Cross sat, bound to a chair in Jeremiah's store, surrounded by armed citizens who'd maintained watch through the night. His bluster had evaporated completely when faced with federal authority and overwhelming evidence of his crimes. Sarah made her announcement as the sun climbed over the desert horizon. She stood before the assembled crowd with Ezekiel's authentic documents in her hands, the papers that could make her the richest woman in the territory. But wealth had never been her motivation. Her teaching background had instilled different values. Knowledge belonged to everyone. Resources should benefit entire communities, not just the fortunate few. She explained her decision with the clarity that had made her an effective educator. The water rights would remain in her legal ownership to prevent future theft or manipulation, but access would be licensed fairly to every legitimate user in the valley. Farmers would receive water allocations based on actual need, not ability to pay bribes. Ranchers could water their herds without fear of artificial shortages. Businesses would thrive with reliable access to the territory's most precious resource. The crowd responded with stunned silence, followed by erupting cheers. They'd expected justice, but found something better. A leader who understood that true power came from lifting others up, rather than keeping them down. Tommy watched his mother with swelling pride. She'd transformed from the humiliated woman at the auction into someone who commanded respect through moral courage. Her decision proved that character mattered more than circumstances. Cross's arrest revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise. Marshal Crawford's investigation uncovered fraudulent land claims stretching across territories, forged documents, bribed officials, a network of corruption that had stolen thousands of acres from legitimate owners. The mining consortium collapsed within hours. Cross's business partners fled the territory when news of his arrest spread. Their investments evaporated as federal agents seized assets purchased with illegal profits. Wade Cross approached Sarah as his father was loaded into the marshal's wagon. The boy's face showed genuine remorse for years of following his father's example. He asked what he could do to make amends for past behavior. Sarah saw an opportunity for redemption rather than revenge. Wade possessed detailed knowledge of his father's land frauds. His testimony could help authorities return stolen property to rightful owners. Justice served everyone better than punishment alone. Tommy surprised himself by defending Wade to skeptical townspeople. His former tormentor had risked his father's wrath to help expose the conspiracy. People could change when given the chance to choose better paths. The water licensing system took shape quickly with Sarah's guidance. Her teaching experience proved invaluable for creating fair allocation formulas. Tommy's mechanical skills helped design distribution infrastructure that would serve the entire valley efficiently. Jeremiah Oakley emerged as Sarah's most trusted advisor. His 15 years of documenting Cross's crimes had preserved evidence crucial for federal prosecution. More importantly, his friendship with Ezekiel provided historical context for the water rights' original intent. The store owner revealed Ezekiel's final letter, hidden in his safe alongside the geological surveys. The hermit had written specific instructions for his discovery's eventual use. Water should benefit everyone, regardless of wealth or social status. The desert's harshness required communities to work together for survival. Sarah's moral authority grew stronger with each decision. When territorial officials offered to buy the water rights for astronomical sums, she refused. When railroad companies proposed exclusive access deals, she declined. The water belonged to the land and the people who worked it honestly. Tommy found his social status transformed overnight. Former bullies now sought his friendship. Classmates who'd ignored him suddenly wanted to hear about his adventures. But the experience had taught him that respect earned through courage mattered more than popularity granted by circumstances. Wade Cross became an unlikely ally in designing the valley's irrigation system. His knowledge of local geography combined with Tommy's mechanical expertise to create innovative solutions for water distribution. Former enemies discovered they worked well together when pursuing common goals. The cabin itself underwent dramatic renovation as water rights income flowed in. Sarah hired local workers to repair the structure properly. The building that had symbolized failure and desperation became a comfortable family home surrounded by desert gardens made possible by reliable water access. Cross's trial became territorial news as federal prosecutors presented evidence of his crimes. The case established important legal precedents about water rights and land fraud. Sarah testified with the same clear authority she'd once used in the classroom. The mayor's conviction brought closure to years of corruption, but also highlighted the positive changes already underway. Dustwell territory was thriving under honest leadership and fair resource distribution. Property values rose as water access encouraged legitimate investment and development. Sarah accepted the town council's request to serve as interim mayor until proper elections could be held. Her first official act was establishing a public school with emphasis on practical education. Tommy would learn alongside former enemies in classrooms that prepared students for productive citizenship. The memorial to Ezekiel Thornfield took shape in the town square. A simple stone marker acknowledging the hermit's sacrifice and vision. The inscription promised that his discovery would serve future generations with the same integrity he'd shown in life. Water flowed freely through new irrigation channels that transformed desert into productive farmland. The sound of running water replaced the silence of scarcity that had defined the territory for too long. Cross's empire of fear had given way to a community built on cooperation and mutual respect. 1 month after Cross's arrest, Sarah stood in her renovated kitchen, watching desert sunrise paint the mountains gold. The cabin that had once threatened to collapse now stood solid and welcoming. New windows let in streams of morning light that revealed polished wood floors and freshly plastered walls. Tommy burst through the front door, carrying his school satchel and a rolled set of engineering drawings. His transformation from outcast to popular student had happened gradually, as classmates recognized his genuine talents. The boy who'd once hidden from bullies now led study groups and helped younger children with their lessons. The Water Commission office occupied the cabin's former bedroom. Sarah had converted the space into headquarters for managing the territory's most valuable resource. Maps covered the walls, showing irrigation channels that now brought life to previously barren land. Filing cabinets held licensing agreements that ensured fair water distribution throughout the valley. Wade Cross knocked on the doorframe before entering. The mayor's son had changed dramatically since his father's imprisonment. Gone was the arrogant swagger that had terrorized other children. In its place was genuine humility and determination to repair the damage caused by his family's crimes. Wade and Tommy spread their latest irrigation designs across Sarah's desk. The former enemies had become inseparable partners in engineering projects that served the entire community. Their friendship proved that people could overcome past grievances when working toward common goals. The boys had spent weeks calculating optimal water pressure for the new district serving homesteads on the valley's eastern edge. Tommy's mechanical intuition combined with Wade's detailed knowledge of local terrain to create efficient distribution systems that conserved every precious drop. Sarah reviewed their calculations with the thoroughness that had made her an effective teacher. The mathematical precision impressed her, but more importantly, the project demonstrated how cooperation produced better results than competition or conflict. Jeremiah Oakley arrived for their weekly planning meeting, carrying account ledgers and correspondence from territorial officials. The store owner had become Sarah's most trusted advisor in managing the complex legal and financial aspects of the water rights. The licensing revenues exceeded everyone's expectations. Farmers paying fair rates for reliable water access generated more income than Cross's extortion schemes ever had. Legitimate businesses thrived when freed from artificial scarcity and corrupt officials demanding bribes. Sarah had established strict reinvestment policies. 70% of water revenues funded infrastructure improvements and system expansion. 20% supported education and community services. only 10% provided for her family's modest needs. The territorial governor had visited twice to study their successful water management model. Federal officials praised the system as an example of how natural resources could benefit entire communities rather than just wealthy interests. Newspaper reporters from distant cities wrote articles about the transformation of Dustwell territory. Tommy's engineering scholarship letter had arrived the previous week. The Territorial Technical College offered full funding for advanced studies in civil engineering and hydraulics. His mechanical talents and practical experience with water systems made him an ideal candidate for professional training. But Tommy wanted to return after graduation to expand the valley's irrigation network. His vision included connecting their aquifer system to neighboring territories, where drought continued to devastate farming communities. Water could become the foundation for regional prosperity. Wade faced different challenges. His father's criminal conviction had destroyed the family's social standing and financial resources. Cordelia Cross worked as a seamstress to support herself while her husband served his federal prison sentence. The family home had been seized to pay restitution to fraud victims. Sarah had offered Wade employment maintaining the water distribution infrastructure. The work provided honest income, while teaching valuable skills in hydraulic engineering. More importantly, it gave the young man opportunities to rebuild his reputation through community service. The school board had unanimously elected Sarah as superintendent of the new territorial education system. Her vision combined traditional academic subjects with practical training in agriculture, engineering, and business management. Students would graduate prepared for productive careers that served growing frontier communities. Cross's trial had concluded with convictions on 17 federal charges. The former mayor would spend 15 years in territorial prison, followed by permanent banishment from Arizona territory. His co-conspirators received shorter sentences, but faced similar exile from the region they'd tried to exploit. The abandoned mining consortium properties were being converted into productive farms and businesses under new ownership. Federal authorities had returned stolen land to legitimate owners, while opening remaining parcels to honest settlers. The valley's population had doubled as news of reliable water access spread throughout the region. Tommy's mechanical workshops had become popular gathering places, where young people learned practical skills while working on community projects. His teaching style combined his father's technical knowledge with his mother's educational expertise. Students left understanding how things worked, rather than just memorizing abstract theories. Sarah's mayoral election campaign was proceeding without organized opposition. The entire community supported her continued leadership after witnessing the transformation she'd guided over the past months. Her platform emphasized sustainable growth, educational excellence, and resource stewardship. The cabin's cellar had been converted into a museum, honoring Ezekiel Thornfield's contributions to territorial development. Visitors could examine the geological surveys and scientific instruments that had revealed the valley's hidden water wealth. School children learned about the importance of scientific knowledge and moral courage in building better communities. Evening found Sarah and Tommy sitting on their front porch, watching irrigation channels carry life-giving water toward distant farms. The sound of flowing water had replaced the desert silence that once marked their isolation and poverty. The silver dollar from the auction sat in a place of honor on their mantelpiece, a reminder of how desperate circumstances could become opportunities for those with courage to act on their convictions. 6 months after the water rights discovery, the entire territory gathered for the dedication of the Thornfield Memorial Well in Dustwell's town square. Sarah stood before the assembled crowd, wearing the simple blue dress she'd worn to teach school before her world had collapsed at that humiliating auction. The memorial well rose from polished desert stone, quarried by local craftsmen. Bronze plaques told Ezekiel's story, and honored his sacrifice for future generations. Clear spring water bubbled continuously from the central fountain, his gentle sound replacing the harsh silence that had once defined the desert community. Tommy demonstrated the well's engineering principles to fascinated classmates and their parents. His mechanical expertise had grown sophisticated through months of designing irrigation systems with Wade Cross. The former enemies now worked as equal partners in projects that served the entire valley. The territorial governor arrived with a delegation of federal officials to witness the ceremony. Word of Dustwell's transformation had spread throughout the frontier territories. Newspapers carried stories about the community that had turned corruption into cooperation through moral leadership and fair resource distribution. Sarah carried the same silver dollar that had purchased their cabin at auction. The coin had become a symbol of how desperate circumstances could transform into unexpected opportunities. She would place it in the memorial well to honor Ezekiel's vision and mark the completion of their community's rebirth. Wade Cross stood with his mother near the back of the crowd. Cordelia had worked tirelessly to rebuild her family's reputation after her husband's imprisonment. Her seamstress business provided honest income, while Wade earned respect through community service and engineering projects. The boy who had once bullied Tommy now served as his closest friend and collaborator. Their partnership demonstrated that people could overcome past grievances when working toward common goals. Former enemies had become essential allies in building a better future. Jeremiah Oakley took the podium to read from Ezekiel's final letter. The hermit's words about water belonging to all desert dwellers resonated powerfully with the assembled crowd. His vision of communities cooperating for survival had become reality through Sarah's leadership and the citizens' commitment to fairness. The store owner revealed his own role in preserving Ezekiel's legacy. For 15 years he had documented Cross's crimes while waiting for someone honest to discover the hidden water rights. His patient accumulation of evidence had ensured justice when the moment finally arrived. Tommy's engineering scholarship would begin in the fall, but he planned to return after graduation to expand the valley's water systems. His vision included connecting their aquifer network to neighboring territories, where drought continued to devastate farming communities. Regional cooperation could multiply the benefits of Ezekiel's discovery. Sarah's mayoral victory had been unanimous. The entire community recognized her transformation from desperate widow to effective leader. Her policies emphasized sustainable growth, educational excellence, and resource stewardship. The cabin that had symbolized failure now represented triumph over adversity. The new school system combined traditional academics with practical training in agriculture, engineering, and business management. Students would graduate prepared for productive careers in growing frontier communities. Education served economic development while preserving democratic values. Cross's mining consortium properties had been converted into thriving farms and businesses under honest ownership. The federal investigation had returned thousands of acres to legitimate owners, while opening remaining land to qualified settlers. Population growth strained the expanded water system, but created prosperity for established residents. The memorial ceremony attracted visitors from throughout the territory who wanted to study Dustwell's successful development model. Railroad companies proposed connecting the community to broader transportation networks. Banking institutions offered financing for additional infrastructure projects. But Sarah maintained her commitment to controlled growth that preserved community values. Rapid expansion could recreate the inequality and corruption they had worked so hard to eliminate. Sustainable development required careful planning and continued citizen participation in decision-making processes. Tommy stepped forward to explain the memorial well's symbolic significance. The flowing water represented life, returning to the desert through human cooperation and scientific knowledge. Ezekiel's sacrifice had made possible not just irrigation systems, but the social transformation that ensured fair distribution. The crowd included dozens of families who had arrived since news of reliable water access spread throughout the region. Former skeptics who had mocked Sarah at the auction now sought her advice on community development. Her moral authority had grown stronger with each successful decision. Wade Cross approached the memorial with a wreath honoring the hermit who had died protecting his discovery. The gesture marked his complete transformation from privileged bully to humble community servant. His father's crimes could not be undone, but their consequences had taught valuable lessons about justice and redemption. Sarah placed the silver dollar into the memorial well's clear water. The coin settled among colorful stones donated by local children. Each stone represented a family whose life had been improved by fair access to the valley's most precious resource. The ceremony concluded with Tommy and Wade unveiling plans for the next phase of irrigation expansion. Their partnership had produced innovations that captured the attention of territorial engineering experts. Young people could contribute meaningfully to community development when given opportunities and encouragement. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah remained beside the memorial well, listening to the gentle sound of flowing water. The desert silence that had once marked isolation and scarcity was gone forever. In its place was the music of prosperity, shared by all who worked honestly for the common good. The silver dollar gleamed beneath the surface, a reminder that courage and character could transform the most desperate circumstances into triumph. Ezekiel's vision had become reality through cooperation, education, and unwavering commitment to justice. 1 year after the silver dollar hit the auction table, Sarah Mitchell stood before the largest crowd in Dustwell Territory's history. Liberation Day had become an annual celebration, marking the community's transformation from corruption to prosperity. The desert town that had once mocked a desperate widow now honored her as their most respected leader. The territorial governor presented Sarah with an official commendation for outstanding public service. Her water management system had become the model for resource development throughout the American Southwest. Federal officials studied Dustwell's success to guide policy in other frontier regions struggling with scarcity and corruption. Tommy returned from his first semester at Territorial College with advanced engineering knowledge and ambitious plans. His mechanical talents had flourished under professional instruction, but his commitment to serving his home community remained unchanged. The boy who had once hidden from bullies now commanded respect from professors and classmates alike. The cabin stood transformed into a beautiful family home, surrounded by gardens made possible by reliable water access. Desert flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds, while fruit trees provided shade and sustenance. The structure that had symbolized failure and desperation now represented hope and perseverance. Wade Cross had earned his high school diploma with honors while working full-time maintaining the valley's irrigation infrastructure. His transformation from privileged bully to humble community servant was complete. The friendship between former enemies had become legendary among students, who learned that people could overcome past grievances through mutual respect. Jeremiah Oakley unlocked his store safe one final time to reveal the last of Ezekiel's secrets. The hermit's complete will had been sealed for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to be read publicly. The document contained provisions that would astonish even those who thought they knew the full story. Ezekiel had predicted that his water rights would eventually be discovered by someone who would use them honorably. His will established a perpetual trust, ensuring that water access could never be monopolized by corrupt interests. The legal framework guaranteed fair distribution for all future generations. More importantly, the will designated specific criteria for the trust's administration. The water rights would be managed by whoever had shown the greatest kindness to friendless people. Ezekiel had observed human nature carefully enough to identify the character traits that would best serve community welfare. Sarah's behavior toward outcasts and desperate people had demonstrated exactly the compassion Ezekiel valued. Her refusal to exploit the water rights for personal gain proved she possessed the moral authority needed to protect his legacy. The legal documentation confirmed what everyone already knew about her character. Cross's federal prison sentence was proceeding without incident. The former mayor had been assigned to work details that improved infrastructure for prison communities. Even in confinement, he was learning that honest labor produced more satisfaction than corrupt schemes ever had. Tommy's engineering innovations continued attracting attention from technical colleges and government agencies. His practical experience with water systems combined with formal education to produce solutions that addressed real community needs. Several territories had requested his consultation on irrigation projects. The school system Sarah had established was graduating students prepared for productive careers in agriculture, engineering, and business management. Her combination of academic rigor with practical training produced young people who could contribute immediately to community development while pursuing further education. Wade's mother, Cordelia, had rebuilt her life through honest work and community service. Her seamstress business thrived as prosperity increased demand for quality clothing. More importantly, she had earned forgiveness from neighbors who recognized her genuine efforts to make amends for past association with corruption. The memorial well in the town square had become a pilgrimage site for visitors studying successful community development. The flowing water and bronze plaques telling Ezekiel's story inspired other frontier settlements facing similar challenges with resource scarcity and corrupt leadership. Railroad connections had brought economic opportunities while preserving the community's democratic values. Sarah's careful growth policies prevented the inequality and exploitation that often accompanied rapid development. Sustainable prosperity required constant vigilance to protect the principles that made success possible. Tommy opened the town's new technical training center, where young people learned practical skills needed for continued development. His teaching methods combined his father's mechanical expertise with his mother's educational philosophy. Students understood both theory and application of engineering principles. The silver dollar from the auction occupied a place of honor in the Mitchell family home. Tommy often held the coin while reading Ezekiel's journal aloud to neighborhood children. The stories taught lessons about courage, perseverance, and the importance of using knowledge to serve others rather than exploit them. Sarah's second mayoral term focused on regional cooperation that would extend their water management success to neighboring territories. Her vision of interconnected communities sharing resources fairly was becoming reality through patient negotiation and mutual benefit agreements. The cabin's cellar museum attracted scholars researching frontier science and social development. Ezekiel's geological surveys and scientific instruments demonstrated how individual dedication to truth could transform entire regions. His example inspired new generations of students and community leaders. Evening found Sarah and Tommy on their front porch, listening to irrigation channels carry life throughout the valley. The sound of flowing water had replaced desert silence permanently. Thousands of families now thrived because one desperate woman had found courage to spend her last dollar on hope. Tommy asked his mother to tell Ezekiel's story once more. She opened the hermit's journal to the first page and began reading about hidden treasures that could only be found by those with wisdom to look beyond surface appearances. The greatest treasures were not gold or silver, but the bonds between people who chose cooperation over conflict, justice over exploitation, and hope over despair.